All right, it all comes together with the citrus, and in this case you'd need about 1.5, and you can get away with 2. This doesn't need a lot of precise measuring here. Pieces of citrus, lemon and lime. So it starts off with 1.5 lemons, or you can do 2, and then 1 full lime. And then one of these things. If you've got one of those fancy squeezers, you can use that too. And since we strain the juice off of this before we serve it, you can strain it right to the bowl. You don't even have to worry about picking out all the seeds. So we start with the lime, and we want to make sure we get all that goodness out of there, and the other half of the lime. And I think you see where this is going. Next we'll do the lemon. Ceviche really does have its roots in the islands. I think probably one of the most famous ones is a Peruvian dish. There's also a Mexican version of ceviche. They come from all over the place, but a Peruvian family that I grew up with in South Florida, when they would make it, this was one of the tricks that they would do that I used to always love. And one of it was the addition of some fresh herbs. And they had a nice little herb garden. Some fresh basil and oregano is what I just added to that. And then something that they would use was sugar. They would just use cane sugar. Well, instead of that, I like to just put a little bit, a squeeze. And you saw, I mean, we're talking like maybe that much. So we'll call it a scant tablespoon, or teaspoon rather, scant teaspoon of honey. Give that a stir so the honey blends in, because if your limes and lemons are cold, it will actually make the honey congeal, and then you'll have this glob of honey and it won't get all throughout your citrus. And all that does is it takes just a little bit of the bite out of the citrus, so you don't have that little burn in the back of the throat. And now you get to where you got to do your seafood, and it starts like this. So here's a fresh piece of mahi, and we're going to take it and cube it, and I want pieces that are roughly, we'll say anywhere, I want them to be identifiable, so keep them about a 1/2 inch piece, so it looks like that right there. You can do it if you're making a big fancy one, you can do bigger pieces, but here's what I've realized over the years of making this, is if you make the pieces big and people get a big mouthful of something they may be a little iffy on to begin with, they're tending not to go back for seconds. But if they're little bite-sized pieces, people get past the idea it's cooked, but they still think that it's raw, so it helps them get by that. And the same thing with the shrimp. You can do the whole shrimp, but I like to take them and cut them in half so they're bite-sized pieces. By the way, make sure that they've been cleaned, deveined, and of course deshelled. And the same idea here, we're just going to take some of the shrimp, cut them into bite-sized pieces, and into the citrus mix they go. All right, I want you to get a good look at this before we start to toss it. The shrimp looks like raw shrimp, the mahi looks like raw mahi. Now, I'm gonna toss this in here. I wanted to get a nice coating all over every piece, and there's no problem with if it's got some pieces that stick out, because you can go back and do the same thing, give it a little stir, and the mahi and the shrimp will continue to cook, and it will also continue to mix in and take up some of the flavors of the oregano and the basil. Now, I'd like to say, okay, that's it, it's done. But no, not by any means. Let me show you what it looks like after it's sat for a little while. This is it now, okay? Here's the shrimp. It looks like it's been cooked or boiled. It's white all the way through. And here's the mahi. It's the same thing. It's been cooked by the acid. The protein, in this case, has been fully denatured all the way through. In this, I want it to continue to cook, but I don't want the tops to dry out. And if they sit out and they're exposed to the air, sometimes that'll happen. So with a piece of plastic wrap, go right down. We're not going to try to cover the top. We actually want to cover the food. So I want the plastic wrap to actually make contact with the ceviche itself, with the raw shrimp, with the raw mahi. So push that, getting all the air out all the way around. And now this is going to go into the refrigerator a minimum of about 45 minutes. You could let this go overnight and you're still going to be okay. Let's get ready to make the rest of basically what becomes the salsa in this seafood salsa, the ceviche. Get rid of the little nub there out of the tomato where the vine grows. And the only difference in some of the recipes that I've seen and the way that I particularly like it, there are some folks that like to just chop their tomatoes right into it, and that's not a bad thing, but I'm not into the seeds to go along with this. I just don't want that texture. So I'm going to de-seed the tomato, but I'm not going to fully concasse the tomato, which would be removing the skin and everything else. I'm just going to pull out on the pieces here the seed core. I want the color, I want the flavor of the tomato, the essence of the tomato, but I don't want a bunch of the seed pods in there. Now, if you want to use those, not just discard them, and you're making a regular salsa, you could chop those up and add them to a salsa. Need to be just fine. So into 2 little slivers. And when it comes to the size of the dice, I like it a little bit smaller than the size of the shrimp and or the mahi. That way, those are the star attraction, and these make up the perfect little background. Step 1, tomatoes are in the bowl. Step 2, we're going to bring a little heat to it. It is sort of a salsa after all, and we're going to do it with jalapenos. The most important part here, all of the seeds, all of the pith gone. That's where the heat sits, and you do not want to bite into one of those seeds, especially if you're feeding it to people that like more mild type things, because, well, it can light you up. So a nice small dice. We want little bits of heat. We want them to kind of sneak up in there and get you, but not completely overwhelm the flavor of what is really sort of a mild, tangy, and citrusy dish. For a little bit more crunch, we're going to do some onion, and again, this is all about your preference. I like the sweeter onions. You can use the red onions if you want, or if you like big, bold onion flavor, you can even use some of the white onions, but this is just an oh-so-sweet onion, kind of like the Valdalia type. And again, nice little tiny pieces. We want that little reminder that there's onion in there, but not completely being overwhelmed by the fact that, wow, there's onion in there. Since we do have the heat, we do have the onion, we want something to kind of balance it out and mellow it, and that's in the way of fat. We're going to add a little olive oil to it before it's all said and done, but there's another way to get fat, a healthy fat, and that's the avocado. So we got a nice, soft, ripe avocado, but not so soft that it's mushy. Remember the trick here, if you haven't seen this before, pop the seed out, just stab it with, or hit it with the knife on the flat edge. You want to bring it up, and the last thing you want to do is try to grab this and pull it off from the blade side. Remember, the pinch right from the back, the seed comes off, and your hands stay cut free. Now, with the avocado in the palm of your hand, we want little chunks, and instead of having to scoop this out and then chunk it, let's just go ahead and do it while it's still in the skin, making little marks. Again, we're doing it smaller than the size of the mahi and or the shrimp bites. And then we want it to be a dice, so we're just going to turn it, and we'll come across it sort of at an angle here. This is almost starting to look like a salsa already. I mean, that thing, just squeeze some lime on it, and that'd be good enough to eat. I do like a little bit of olive oil in mine, so I'm just going to put just a drizzle. If you need a measurement, I would say maybe a teaspoon or 2. And I like to enhance. I like the seafood flavor. So this is just some clam juice, and here's how much we're going to do of that. The same thing, just a little splash. And you're thinking, well, that's a waste. What do you do with the rest of it? I add it to my Bloody Marys. Now, there are some recipes that want you to dump the liquid that you've basically cooked the fish back into it. I'm not a big fan of those. I think it's just a little too much. That's why I add the clam. So I use a slotted spoon, and I strain the ceviche, in this case the mahi and the shrimp, from the liquid. Now let me tell you this part. When it comes to fish, it doesn't just have to be mahi, it doesn't just have to be shrimp. You can do any of the white fishes, tilapia included. Halibut works really well with it. I've even had it with different types of shark, mako especially, and I think shrimp is just the classic part of ceviche. And once again, we give this a toss, and then we'll finish it with a little squeeze of lime over the top. And they're thinking, all right, great, now what do you do with it? If it was me, I would just eat it with a fork, just like it is. This is the way I like it. But there's also some other ways to eat it, so let's explore some of those. And here's some of the ways that you can enjoy it. Probably the most common, if you get it at a restaurant, served in a little martini glass, a little fruit on the side, and of course the little squeeze of lime that go on the very end there just to give it that extra brightness. One of the ways that I like, whether it's the soft taco and or the hard taco, you can actually use it as a taco. You got your meat and salsa basically in one, a little cheese and lettuce, and I've seen these becoming more and more popular, it's a ceviche salad with lettuce, and it can be bib lettuce, romaine, whatever you want, even that old famous 70s super salad lettuce, the iceberg. This one, though, is my favorite. Listen, I think once you get past the fact that it really is cooked, even though it's not in the traditional sense, you get yourself some fresh fish, you get yourself some fresh shrimp, you get yourself some limes, some lemons, and the rest of the accoutrement. You add them all together, give it time to swim. I think you two will say, when it comes to something healthy, delicious, a ceviche, there truly is none better.